Hello, my name is David Fielder, an actor, here to represent a talk given by Eugene Halliday entitled Levels of Being, recorded in Liverpool in the early 1960s. He often illustrated his thoughts throughout his lectures, and in this representation we've selected certain of his images to accompany the text. The lecture will be split into two halves. Levels of Being, Part 1. I think we'll start with a diagram. At the bottom, there is a square to represent the mineral world. In the next level, a pair of leaves will do to present the plant world. The next level is the animal world. The next level is man, a five-pointed star, so he represents man dictated to by his five senses. Above this level is also man, represented by a double triangle or six-pointed star. We're going to talk about origins of being. We know that if we represent the origin of all things as cause equals power, somewhere at the top there is absolute power. Power absolute. This power, by a process of self-involvement, generates all the levels below. Now we tend, in the time process, to start with the material world, the mineral world. When we do so, we are dealing with something that at the top is quite free and at the bottom is bound. We have 5 circles of bondage, and then at the top a couple of free horns. Now, you remember that the semicircle is to remind us that force descends through successive levels down to a limiting factor and then climbs up again. So we'll have a force from the absolute, from the infinite, involving itself in successive layers of being or successive vehicles, successive coverings. Let's start with the lowest one of all, the closed one of matter, the mineral world. This one is inertic. It is the only world we know of that acts only when it is struck from outside. If we take a billiard ball, it will lie indefinitely on the billiard table until we take the cue and hit the ball with the cue. So we can say that the billiard ball is the type of entity response of the mineral world. It does not move unless it is struck from outside. Now, immediately above this level, we have the level of the plant. And we see something in the plant that we do not see in the mineral world. We see orientation. The plant stays where it is, but nevertheless its roots seek moisture and its branches seek light. So there is a tendency in the plant to break out from its own centre. And if we take a round thing like the billiard ball, it remains itself. If we take a round thing like the seed of a plant, as soon as it gets moisture and warmth, it starts to grow from inside. So in the plant, there's a principle that orientates itself, but it doesn't uproot itself and run about. When we come to the animal world, we find a level that runs about. So that if we let the mineral world be represented by pure inertia that does not change unless acted upon from outside, we can say that the plant world represents the feeling level of being, where there is a definite orientation without pursuit. There is a preparedness, a readiness to grow, providing the means of life come to it, moisture and heat. In the animal level, there is not only the preparedness to grow, there is actually a growing about in pursuit of the means of growth. Running about in pursuit of the means of growth. The animal runs about to find its food. When we climb up to the level of empirical man, we find that the means of life are pursued by the man, like the animal pursues them, but he adds to it a process of comparing the sense data from his 5 sense organs and computing with these the best means of surviving. He does something that the animal doesn't do adequately. He compares things from different sources. He goes all over the world for his information, and he brings all the sources of information together in a manner that the animal cannot do. The animal can do it in a very, very limited degree. Now, we find in anthropoid apes a tendency to use a stick as a lever, or to knock off bananas or something, or to pile boxes on each other, but we do not find them collating these things and making very wide analogies between different levels of being. In the empirical man, we do. Now, when we come to the man above the empirical, the man with the double triangles, we are concerned with the man who thinks not after the fact from experience, but before the fact from first geometrical principles. Now, to think geometrically is to say that if a certain thing occurs, something else necessarily follows. Now, in the realm of empirical man, there is no necessity. There is only statistical probability. Science, built by empirical man, using their 5 senses, does not admit necessity at all. It only admits statistical probability. If you go to the USA and to New York a sufficient number of times in the year and find a lot of automobiles there, you will be led to expect some more if you go again. But there is nothing necessary about that, because the next war might wipe them all out. It might submerge Manhattan Island itself. So for the empirical 5-sense scientist, there is no necessity. There is only statistical probability. But for the man of the double triangle, the man of the a priori knowledge, there is necessity, and he thinks in terms of necessary behaviors of energies. The logic of the dialectic of the double triangle says that if we close a zone by running a force around it, walling it off, that we have necessarily isolated the inside from the outside, that the circle necessarily includes and excludes simultaneously. Now, this is a self-evident thing as soon as we state it, but it is not self-evident to the man who depends on his 5 sense organs all the time. As a matter of fact, most empirical scientists would even doubt the necessity of a circle enclosing a zone at all. They would say that it might be merely some phenomenal behaviour of the sensory part of our organism, and therefore the empirical man cannot see the necessity in this. But there is something in a human being that can see the necessity of such facts, and this something in the human being is the level of the necessary logical relations. Now, it would be a very good idea if each one of us actually made such a graph, and then on this graph places his knowledge about any given subject. Now, at the top level, we add the absolutely free spirit. This means that in any subject where you are fully spiritually enlightened, you are free. But as soon as we come down to the level of the logical, we see that we are conditioned in some measure. When we come down to the necessary logic of the double triangle, we are immediately deprived of the purely free, and we gain freedom. we have now domed free. We've wrapped it up in the first phase, and we've enclosed our concept. We have formulated the free spirit, and in the act of formulation, that which was free becomes bound. Now, this double triangle, six-pointed star, is the symbol of macrocosmic wisdom. It is the wisdom of necessary closures, of necessary relations. Nevertheless, it is a limitation. So no matter how big we make the circle of the macrocosmos, it is still a limitation. If we take the Gospel of John, consider the logos in the first verse, we find that the word logos is stated to be in the beginning with God and to be a God. Nevertheless, that logos is not that which is beyond it. That which is beyond it is the absolute. That absolute is absolutely free, and being absolutely free has of itself nothing existent. But everything is beyond existence within it. Its first determination is therefore its first bondage. The man bound by necessary logic, determined by it, is at the top level. Now, if he lets go of his necessary logic, he then commits himself to the experiential logic of the five-pointed star. When he does this, he now becomes dependent not on a logical process of either-or, and the identity of either and or, the identity of opposites, but he becomes into a state of dependence on five very, very limited sense organs. If you consider the whole mass of your body, and the very small amount of the cells of the body used up in special sense organs like the eyes, the ears, nose, and so on, you'll find the greatest mass of your body is not illuminated directly by sense organ activity. The general diffusion of the sense of touch over the body is the widest spread. The sense of touch is spread over your body pretty widely, but there are points of anesthesia throughout the body. Now, it is not total. If you look at the sense of smell, it's fairly vague. You can get a sensation of perfumes coming into your nostrils from over the hills and far away. But you can't tell whether the chip shop is around the corner to the right or to the left, because it depends on the direction of the air current when it comes to you. So that if the wind happens to be spinning vortically, then you can get false orientation about the location of the chip shop. Now you may notice that if a fly comes into a room in search of something, perhaps of something sweet, the fly will not fly straight to it, but it will fly in certain apparently haphazard directions. It is really flying upon gradients of increasingly strong smell, determined by the air currents in the room. So that the empirical man is like this fly. He can only fly in the direction of the sense stimulus. And as the sense stimuli are very, very particularized on the 5 points of the sense organs, the man who gets information only from the sense organs is automatically deprived of a terrific number of sources of information. So, between the 5 points of the five-pointed star, which represent the 5 sense organs, we have great spaces where no information is available at all. The eye responds to a certain limited number of frequencies, the ear to another number of frequencies, but the visual frequencies and the audio frequencies, between them there is a terrific gap. Scientifically, we know that this gap is filled with motion, with frequencies. but the sense organs can tell you nothing whatever about them. But although the specialized sense organs can't tell you anything about them, nevertheless, the substance of your body can. Wherever the sense organ is not specialized, wherever the nervous system itself does not insert a limiting factor, a control factor on the cell, then you have the cell responding totally, and therefore filling in the frequency gaps that exist between the 5 sense organs. This means to say that if we take 2 points of the 5-pointed star, we can fill in all the space between with cells, which you'll remember are divisions of the original single cell from which you derive. Now, these cells, insofar as they haven't got direct nervous inhibiting forces on them, respond totally in a situation. Therefore, at the cellular level, there are no gaps of frequency. That means that if you can take yourself, by the suitable exercise, below the level of the nervous system's rational control, you will expose yourself to frequencies which in fact will give you information that you cannot get through your 5 specialized sense organs. And this information will be more diffuse than the sense organs, but it will refer to other levels of being that the sense organs can, in fact, touch. Now, let's go back to the graph again. So after we've left the free spirit, and gone into the first bondage of the logos and the necessary form, we descend into the contingent form, which is not necessary, and which is governed by laws only statistical. That is, the laws which can change as the information grows. When we come down a further stage, we come into a realm where desires operate instead of idea, where the desire is an energy pushing us along. And it is pushing us towards the pleasant and away from the unpleasant. It is nevertheless determined. Although it is not determined in the sense in which the mechanical adding of sense data at the top are determined, it is still limited. It has fewer factors to play with, and therefore its limitation is much greater on its actions. Now, the animal runs towards the pleasant and away from the unpleasant, and is therefore determined, we can say, in a double manner. When we come down onto the level of the vegetable reaction, we find again that this doubleness of the pleasure-pain is there, but it cannot run about to get it. It can only get it by a slow process of growth. The roots will grow towards the damp. They don't get up and they don't run towards the food. They grow towards it. Nevertheless, it is a kind of orientation towards that which it needs. When we come down to the mineral level, we're coming down to the level of pure inertia. This line that marks the top level, we can call the line of demarcation between life and death. We'll find this is very, very important psychologically later. As soon as we get down to the level of the mineral, we've entered the world of death. Everything above the mineral level, doesn't matter whether we include viruses and bacteria or not, not at the moment, we'll keep it simple. Everything below this top line of the mineral order is dead. That is inert. That is unable to develop from inside itself. But everything above that line is growing, either growing towards the object, simply and sturdy like a plant, or growing inside itself, internal organs of discrimination, organs of specialized desire, which lead to mobility, and then to the growth of specialized sense organs in the 5-sense man, and then to the growth of the pure logos faculty in the cosmic-minded man. At each level as we go down, we're losing a freedom. And at the bottom level of the mineral, we have lost all the freedom. The thing is now not freedom at all. It is just dome. It is restraint. Now what we want to do is make a diagram. Everybody can make his own in the privacy of his own chamber without telling lies. He doesn't need to show it to anybody else. Make such a diagram and then start off with all the subjects that you can think of. Supposing you take physics and science. Where will you put it on this diagram? Supposing for a moment that you have no interest whatever in physics, that you're quite apathetic. You don't see that it is of any use to you. Now, if you are apathetic, you are not feeling. Apathy means not feeling. Consequently, you must be on the level of this dividing line between the inorganic, the dead, and the living. If you don't think physics is important to you at all, you have no feeling whatever for it, you can put your physics line in the mineral world. You can say, in relation to physics, you are dead. This might not seem important until you come to consider this, that the dead get buried by the living. Wherever you don't know something, you are passive to another being who does know something about that subject. Remember our basic rule, either you learn to push yourself about, or you will be pushed about by another being. And there's no middle course in this world. The beings that will not learn to become self-determinant will be determined by other beings. So, if there is a subject you don't know about at all and you feel apathetic about it, so that really you say, well, I can be dead to that thing, put it down below. Put it down below and mark yourself a bad mark, because in that field you are passive. If in another field you think you can work it out from first principles, well, we'll say one of you is soaked in Euclid or something in relation to geometrical necessity, you can put yourself a higher circle up higher, if you can. If your geometry is empirical and has been derived by fiddling about with a pair of compasses empirically, and no necessary propositions have arisen in you, then you will have to write it on the empirical level. But at the empirical level, you are subjected to the necessary laws of geometrical motion. Take any subject at all that you like, whether it's art, science, anthropology, sociology, psychology, psychosomatology, whatever it is, place yourself a circle and write the name of that thing in the circle, and then have a look. You will discover that most of your circles are somewhere below the line of even the empirical man. Or you might get one or two of them just breaking the line out of the animal. If you can say that you have a desire to do something, and that desire is actually making you study a little bit, you can place yourself at the animal level. If you've got a little bit of empirical information, you can draw your circle breaking the line. If you wish, for a certain subject, certain information, but in fact you're waiting for it to come to you, you must put that one in the vegetable world. Now, for every conceivable subject, you must make a circle, and you must be quite truthful with yourself and place these circles on the diagram, and then you must look at them. They'll all be down at the bottom. And then you must remind yourself that unless you lift these circles up, you are passive to the other beings who have already lifted up theirs. This means in every field, wherever you don't know anything at all and couldn't care less about it, you are dead, and a subject to 4 other levels, finited, and 1 level, absolute. If you could lift the subject into the wishing without doing anything about it, at least you're slightly better than the dead mineral, because it doesn't wish. If you can lift the subject up to the level of desire, where you actually start running about in circles without reading anything, it's gone slightly higher. And if you accidentally run into the library and read a book, you go into the empirical level in some measure. And if you actually get yourself a basic principle book of necessary propositions, then you can put your circle at the top level. But for every circle you do not put in one of those levels, you can place yourself as non-existent, and as such you will constitute a nonentity. For all the other forces in the universal field that actually do know something about it. It's a very useful scale, because in relation to any given subject, you will actually find, when you feel in your body a definite positive or negative about it, you will recognize it. If you know nothing about a given subject and you think for a moment that you don't need to, if you examine your feeling very carefully, you'll find the feeling of not needing to is accompanied with an excuse, a reason why you didn't need to. And this means that you're not really comfortable about not knowing about it. When a man doesn't know about a certain subject, he will present some kind of excuse. Oh, he hasn't had time. He didn't see the relevance. As soon as he sees the relevance, then his guilt will increase until he can climb up and get the information he needs. Now, if we say we have a line between the animal and the man, like the evolutionists tend to do, they let the man grow from the mineral, vegetable, animal world, and then they say there is a new emergent. This new emergent is in vocabulary and the human hand. Speech and the hand have made man what he is. Speech has enabled him to tabulate the universe of forms, and the hand has enabled him to utilize these tabs to shift the world about. In fact, to draw the line absolutely between the animal and the man raises a lot of problems, because we do find vocabularies in the animal world. We find birds with vocabularies of perhaps 15 or 20 different whistles. We find monkeys with vocabularies, and so on. Their vocabularies are not as complex nor as well manipulated as those of an ordinary empirical man. Nevertheless, they have them. So it isn't an absolute difference. But as soon as we come to the level above the empirical, we can draw a really important line, because as soon as we get above the empirical man into the levels of necessary forms, we've come across something quite different. The mineral, the billiard ball, moves when we've hit it with a cue. The plant world is already waiting for the opportunity to move. Its roots are just waiting for the damp, and they will start. Its branches are waiting for the light, and they will start. So that when you get, after the cold winter, the seed lying dormant in the ground, and then when the first rains come and the sun starts to warm it up, and you're moving towards the first points of Aries, and the absorption of moisture and heat, they're just what the plant needs, and that's when it starts to grow. It is waiting for it. When we climb into the animal level, it takes that energy, uproots itself, and runs about in search of food and enjoyment. We look at the empirical man. He only does the same thing. A billiard cue hits him on the sense organ, light hits him in the eye, and he sees something. He can't see something unless he's hit in the eye by the stimulus. He can't hear something unless somebody strikes the bell outside. And therefore he's no better in principle than the billiard ball. He's just more complicated. There are more billiard balls in the empirical man than there are on the billiard table, unless it's overcrowded. As soon as we get to the top, where a man is aware of necessaries, he can do something that the empirical man cannot. He can hear bells that nobody rings. He can go in a quiet room on his own. From his first principles, he can argue, my physical body, my so-called material body, is energy in motion. The particles of my material body are simply energies rotating. They are rotating in a field which is absolute. And that absolute is a field of power. And all the constituent motions of all bodies are simply modifications of that field. Consequently, from first principles, we can say that if we take ourselves into a quiet room and know that our sense organs respond to stimuli, then all the parts of our organisms must be stimulating all the other parts. So if we make ourselves very, very sensitive and be very, very quiet and listen very, very carefully, we will actually hear noises going on. If you lie down, relax yourself and wait, you'll hear some pings in the head and in different parts of the body. You'll hear funny noises like bells ringing, or you'll feel remarkable joints or a flash like electricity, and it'll jump in some parts of your body. And you discover that you don't need an external stimulus to do this. In the same way, if you lie in a perfectly darkened room and start looking, putting your consciousness in the retina at the back of your eye, after a few seconds of doing that, you become aware that the room is not dark. Really, what you have done in the act of concentrating on the retina is to stimulate it yourself. As you stimulate your own organisms in this way, you give rise to phenomena inside yourself which are not dependent on external phenomena. You can stimulate those that have been derived from external phenomena and stored up in the memory, in the substance of your being. And by concentration, introversion, and direction of these energies, you can cause memories to replay, and you can raise them to the level of hallucinations. You can relive events in that way by internal self-stimulation. In the same way, by internal self-stimulation, you can discover the kind of information that the cells will give you sub-rationally. You can understand how the vegetable part of your own being, the digestive parts of your body that absorbs things like plants absorb from the earth, you can understand this. They have a peculiar consciousness of their own, and it's quite distinct, even though it belongs in the same body, to the level of the desire, the animal. There's something in you that just sits and lets things come, like din-din down the tube. If it comes, you will digest it. But there is another level which, as soon as the stimulus hits you, if it is of a certain order, you get up and chase it. If it's of another order, you get up and run away from it. It is a different part of your being, and it corresponds with a different part of evolution, when the animal in you, the desire in you, gets up and runs about. Then you find the other level, where ideas are presented in your mind, from empirical experience, from stimulation of your 5 sense organs. Then at the top level of the individuated being, you find this sphere of necessary logical propositions and the laws of necessary motion. All these coexist in the same being, and you can only get at them by fulfilling the conditions at which those things themselves must exist and which they must fulfill. This means that if you want to know about what happens at the necessary level, you must study the necessary laws of motion. If you don't know about them, well, you have to draw your circle about them elsewhere. If you know nothing about them, you'll have to put your circle right below and say, you are dead in relation to the laws of motion that are necessary. Thank you. That is the end of the first part of Levels of Being.